Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin back again, and today we have another special guest with us. We've got Danielle Lynn from the True Self Alchemy YouTube channel. Her channel is all about helping her audience to live the truest life path they possibly can with a focus on leadership and creators. And what does that even mean? I'm interested to find out more about what that means.
I know.
I actually found this person, and I just thought that she had a real creative way of providing her insights.
Yeah.
So this should be interesting. All right, guys, won't keep you waiting. Let's get into it.
Very honored and delighted you invited me to come on board, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Honored and delighted you agreed to it.
Yeah.
Your videos are so interesting. You are so interesting.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive into that interest if y'all like.
Mm-hmm. Well, with a YouTube channel titled such as True Self Alchemy, maybe a good place might be to begin with kind of like, from your perspective, a definition of true self, alchemy, and how they fit together.
Love it. Well, I was playing with the idea of what a true self is, because, you know, as we might have long discussions about what the truth is, right? Depending on who's the perspective and what we're talking about. So I'll just explain it from the resonance that it came to me as. The true self could also be swapped out for the natural self, the self as it is, when it is simply being in its most resonant form, moment to moment. All right. So the word true self, this is what I'm encapsulating in that phrase. Alchemy, in this context, could be seen as the transmutation, the cycle of transmutation, transformation, and living that we all embody simply through existing. So alchemy, you know, I know that it's become a more popular rising word in the years, and sometimes we still think about things like, oh, the scientist who, you know, takes lead and makes it gold in these senses. And there's a very deep esoteric perspective that is built in to the word alchemy that surpasses maybe even our top level knowledge. So when I chose the word, one of the reasons why it called out to me is that it had multi-layered significance in what we talk about as far as a person whose profession is, again, transmuting lead into gold. In the case of the true self, it is the embodiment of transmuting the perspective leaden experiences of life or of the self into the gold of experience. And since alchemy to me inherently contains within it an understanding that everything goes through cycles, and even though we might think, oh, the end result's getting to the gold, the alchemist understands that the laboratory and the process is always really just occurring, right? As long as we're in this play. So true self alchemy, the embodiment of being who you truly are, embracing the experiences of life moment to moment in their lead, in their gold, and enjoying the journey and the experience along the way.
Oh, so what are some of the distractions kind of that would fog someone up from being able to see their true self? Like, it seems like nowadays there's a lot of people like yourself trying to guide people, trying to help people to self-realization, find out who they are. Why is there such a darkness in this realm?
That's an interesting question. So there's a few things you asked there. You know, you asked maybe what might distract, some people from, let's just say, embodying their true self. And then you had in there, how might they navigate that given a perspective of darkness in the realm, which I'm almost registering as two different questions that can have a slight overlap. But let's go ahead and roll with it and see what we get.
Sure.
So what might often distract, what distracts any of us really, is And it's kind of I'll start with a simple answer. It's really just ourselves. Okay. We're the ones kind of doing this whole play, this whole game. And I share with people the perspective that it's really just ourselves playing as ourselves, playing with ourselves in a universe of the self. And it just has a lot of layers to it. And you as the human experience, me as the human experience, we're in a certain kind of, you could say, localized reality of our personal experience that is also interconnected and plugged into, let's say, a universal experience that we're all sharing. So it's almost like having, I've explained to one of my videos, like we were all in a Minecraft server that had certain parameters. Like we're all going to agree that this is the rules of the server. And now each of us is coming in with our character. We're all creators. We're all co-creators. But, we've temporarily agreed to certain parameters while we're playing in this specific space together. And I think that would be a good way to kind of give like a perspective of this game of life, right? We're not limited to the game player we're playing. We're just doing that right now. And there is a bigger, more expansive version of ourselves that's technically controlling the character, right? Who isn't constrained by the rules of that world, but while that person is focused within that world, all right, now we're doing this for a little bit. And so when people so imagine if this was also like an immersive, almost virtual reality experience, and people have been playing it for so long that they start to forget that there is a wider perspective of themselves controlling the game. And they've gotten themselves in such a thing where they're like, okay, well, I have to dig because I have to build this up because I have to build that thing over there because I have to, and they've almost kind of got themselves in a series of events where they're so locked in to the current.
People do that playing Minecraft. They'll whip their controller across the room because they're angry that they couldn't, whatever, like people do that in video games. Yeah.
Well, for real. Oh, because, we're having an immersive experience, right? Like we can get so tuned in that's like, you're finally pausing and you're like, wait, when's the last time I drank water, right? Like it's just.
Yeah.
So what a lot of people are, when people are stuck or they're in, I'm using this in quotes, but when people get in one of those modes, I would describe it as someone who is so invested in the momentum of their game of life that they temporarily forget the full range of capabilities they have, their ability to actually look up from the screen, or even to go like, why was I doing? I spent the last month building this thing in Minecraft, but I'm done. I'm just done. Okay, what do I want to do now? And some people get so tied up in their experience of the game that they may have a literal challenge with the psyche, with the self, because, and I think many of us can relate to this. You can look at anything from like sunk cost fallacy to things like, what happens when you suddenly pause and you go, well, why was I doing this all this time, right? If it wasn't for the enjoyment of it in the experience, suddenly a person needs to reconcile why they made the choices they did for so long. And that can weigh very heavily on the self. So one of the reasons why a lot of people find themselves in these places is because, in a funny way, the pathway to remembering one's empowerment sometimes comes with a lot of personal reckoning that's not quite comfortable.
Oh, it can be terrifying, really. It's in some sense I really agree with everything you just said there. The message, and this identification process with the situation that you're in. But in some sense, it seems like it just depends on who's receptive to what you're saying and who's not. Like somebody might just not. They've got that sunk cost mentality just possessing them or something. But some people are fertile ground. Maybe they've gone through a little bit of loss, or they're just something has happened at the right particular time, and they're actually fertile ground for that to flourish. That message to flourish, and they're like, yeah, I guess I could just switch things up, and then and then you can open a whole avenue of lessons. But yeah,
for real, well said.
Well, timing I think seems to be kind of like everything in this. I was kind of thinking about what you were saying about the true self, and just by watching your channel and what you do, I was trying to think of reaching your highest potential. Is there room for everyone to do that in a world that seems to kind of like depend on people being almost below that. It's like, can we all achieve this, or is it just for some?
I like that question.
It's a great question. All right, I'll share my perspective with you. My own perspective is this world is built to accommodate just about anything that we can perceive. The question often comes from what both an individual will say yes to. And when I say yes to, I'm not talking about they just say yes. You say yes through embodiment, through your actual committed resonance. You know, when you finally decide something, it's not something you have to think about in your head. You know, when you finally have a decision, you're just like, yep, it's just done, because the things are just happening. You're not thinking about it anymore because the decision's made.
You could be saying 1,000, you could be saying 1,000,000 affirmations and not actually be lining up internally with it. And then you could say nothing, but the inside, the switch is already turned. Yeah, I think I do know what you're saying in short.
Exactly. That level of decisiveness. So here's what I found. The world can accommodate all the possibilities we can conceive. We are simultaneously having individual experiences, and then we're having collective experiences. So a person could theoretically build a very empowered, wonderful, delightful life for themselves and maybe have fairly minimal interactions with other people. I'm not saying none at all, but there are ways people have and do configure that for their lives. But I understand that your question might consider things like, well, you know, how can that be if maybe we need workers to do certain things, or maybe there's, you know, certain roles that would be filled that would be less than ideal. My understanding of both reality and momentum is we actually have the technology capability and ability to have a mostly automated world at this point. Like,
I was
if we just
thinking about that as you were saying it. Yeah, we were just talking about AI stuff on the show not too long ago, and it's like, yeah, maybe AI is going to be a big helper, you know, that helping everyone. It's kind of like self-realization. Kind of like, go figure, we were born into this time where, you know, that the message of anything's possible starting to seem oddly possible. You know what I mean? Like, every now and then I'm like, you know, if I'm getting on in my years and all of a sudden it's like life extension, you don't even have to die. I'll be like, all right, jigs up, reality. This is a dream. You know what I mean? Come on.
Well, very much so. And that's the funny thing. Like, I was actually speaking to someone about this where, you know, we sometimes think in terms of, oh, it was like 1,000 years, you know, before this happened. And it was like 100 years for electricity. And then it was, you know, 80 years for internet. And I'm saying, like, you kind of look at the curve of like inventions and the point that we had, like even just in the early 1900s to where we are here, and then from right here to how different things have been in the last 20 years, you know, and the use of AI and just even procedural learning systems that help us process things much faster and potentially come up with solutions. From a technological standpoint, we have all the resources needed to create an environment where technically every person could either fill a role they wanted or perhaps just pursue the arts and stuff. Yeah. The tipping point, or, you know, some people might be like, why don't we have that now? From my perspective and my experience of the way reality operates, one, we do play with momentum in this reality. It's how I explain it. We play with momentum. So it's like, yes, this is a good way to describe, you know, people talk about things like focusing on whether you want to call manifestation or reality creation or however you want to look at it in your life. Things simultaneously can and do happen instantaneously, because from my perspective, everything is happening now. But for the sake of experience, we also agreed to have an experience that we call time, which is really just every now moment seemingly happening simultaneously. And then for the sake of experience, we sometimes build things, not only structures, but we build energetic structures, which I'm in this case calling momentum. Belief systems, religions, businesses, all of these things are concepts with momentum. And because you no longer have one person powering the concept, it's a group awareness momentum. So you have a large group of people, consciously or unconsciously, powering this form which gives it more movement than something happening in your personal localized reality, which is why you can also sometimes make pretty instantaneous shifts that have to do with your personal story that may not have as much momentum plugged into the whole system. I'm starting to go into some of the mechanics that I like to talk about with reality creation. What I say to people, by the way, is this isn't stuff that you necessarily have to dive into unless it delights you. Unless it delights you to dig into all this stuff. The simple things that I have found is when it comes to living a life you genuinely enjoy, being aware of how powerful your focus is and what you are feeding momentum into will make all the difference into what you start experiencing in the next moment and the next moment and the next
It's karma. It's synonymous with karma, right? And I've called it inertia. I say there's all this inertia, you know what I mean, that's got to like wind itself out and stuff like that. But it seems like a real simple investment in this is like, just change that story in your head. If the story in your head is a story of lack, like that is, you're building upon that. Like, wait a sec, you know, just stop the inertia of the negative outlook and start believing that something good is possible. And then, karma or inertia, or what did you call it?
Momentum.
Well, I was thinking snowball effect, you know, starting
effect,
sometimes a lot of people, they start with something small and then if you get one good thing, you can try to roll off of another and, you know, gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
There's like an unlimited nature that comes through sometimes in your messages. Just to sort of quickly touch on your actual videos in your channel, which is great. Sure. I suggest everybody go check it out. But coming through sometimes in your message, I get this sense of like just raw potential, like an excitedness about like this is good news, you know, and more than you can imagine is possible. I don't know if it's possible to segue off of that into a topic.
Well, we could, when we're looking at kind of like the potential within people and the true self, a big part of your channel focuses on creators and leaders. So maybe how did you come to that focus? Maybe.
Well, it's a multifaceted answer, and it does segue very nicely into this, because even as I talk about things like momentum, really one of the core things I speak about is also paradox, because I can note and cite momentum, but I also pointed out instantaneousness, right? Which both exist in this reality, and both are portals to probability. Someone can do the rolling down the hill, a ball, you know, carry speed, and there you go. Someone can do the instantaneous shift. What I talk with creators about is it's really just about choice. It's really just about being so attuned with yourself and your way, and a shift from judgments or should be's into more of a, I'm curious what could be. I'm curious what I could choose. That it really does start to open up the possibilities without limiting your scope on what's possible or probable. And so you asked why creators, why I cite that. From my experience of reality, we have a lot of mirroring going on. What happens is that, and this is again my experience, I see that by and large, how you emanate, how you be, and how you perceive reality to be is how it begins to consistently show up for you. So confirming your bias one way or another, which is what you were starting to point to, like with, you know, assumption and things like that. But it's not what we try and think and convince ourselves. It's what we really, really believe. It's like that almost that heart space, what we know to be true. And what happens is people who identify themselves on some level as creators, whether they're consciously thinking of it, or whether that title simply speaks to them because they read it and they go, yeah, I'm a creator. Well, that is who I make these videos for, because to me, a creator is someone who is inherently recognizing that they not only have the potential to create, but that they are starting to own that label. They're starting to own that perspective. And as such, they've already begun an assumption that begins with, I am a creator, and then follows with, so what's possible? And for me, it's not a judgment towards or against anyone who thinks they aren't a creator. It just would mean that maybe this kind of conversation wouldn't be interesting to you. So why waste anyone's time? Let's talk where people are creators, where they're identifying themselves as such. The beauty I have found, guys, is that there is conversationalists and portals and perspectives for everyone. If the way I'm saying it doesn't jazz with you, then there's someone out there who's saying it in a way that makes a lot of sense. And as such, I don't feel any particular responsibility to, I have to figure out how to talk to all the people. I get to play. I get to be a creator. You get to be creators. We get to be creators. And in doing so, we're naturally embodying the actual outcome that we wanted to live. So no time at all. We're doing it.
Yeah, that's good. That's
good,
man. And it's almost like, man, I feel like it's like a threat to pessimism or something. It's like, somebody that's like bent on things being pessimistic would be like threatened by that. But I want to believe that, and I like that.
Oh, I also kind of see part of it as the self-development process. Creator seems like if it was on Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something, creators should be in there, because I feel like it's like you get to a point where it's like you have to do this to properly self-actualize almost in whatever it is that you do. If being a hermit is your creative aspiration to be the best hermit that ever lived, then that's your thing, whatever it is. I kind of see it as that. But I love the fact that your videos, you film outdoors a lot. And I love when little things happen in your videos, and then like a plane flies above you, and then you'll put a little video clip in there. But obviously it's very intentional that it's outdoors and it's in the forest. And I'm just curious as to what's with the connection to nature, and how does it kind of like merge with some of the stuff that you're talking about?
Yes, I would love to share. So part of the journey of true self alchemy, as I mentioned, is an embodiment journey. In doing this channel, in doing this interview, in doing any of the things I'm doing, I have the self alchemy lab. I'll do private work with people, group work. All of this, for me, the core premise is the embodiment of my version of a flow-based life, of an enjoyable life, one in which there is mutual benefit, mutual respect for me and all involved. And so this left a pretty wide open field for things that I could do. I could open up like a coffee store and do an amazing job and have it be mutual respect, mutual effect, what have you. What happened was, when I chose to do this, I got very clear about what I enjoyed. And some of those things included having time in nature. Some of those things included being as I am. Okay. The costumes and outfits, I'd love to sit there and say, oh, I got them for the video. This is just me going into my closet.
I love it, man. You seem to be like, it comes through in your videos that you are enjoying yourself. Like, I feel like moving my hands like this, so I'm going to do it. And I respect that. I respect that as like a expressive person. And your channel's doing well. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Well, it is fun. And the thing is I go out and have fun. So it's multi-layered. So the first part of that layer was I committed to being as I am. And part of being as I am was living and embodying a life and a lifestyle that included something that I thought would be of great benefit to everyone involved, but I would also enjoy doing it. So some people think in terms of how can I build a business or have a job or live a life or do something, where it helps others, but they sometimes don't consider what truly matters to them as well. Because that's how we sometimes get perpetuated wounded healers. People who believe on some level they must do massive sacrifice all the time in order to help everyone. But I have found that in an ecosystem, right, the trees that are the most productive, that drop the most like fruits or nuts or whatever, are the ones that were really getting proper nutrients and proper rain because they had enough energy to build up their own system. And then when it's time to drop it, boy, they're like dropping seeds, they're feeding the squirrels, all the animals. So it was by being whole of itself that, you know, a certain tree or plant has the ability to grow the flowers and the fruit, because a plant in distress will often like drop flowers or not do stuff. It's like, oh, I got to save my energy, I got to do this, right? So in that way, in what I perceive to be a nourishing ecosystem, we have people who are operating from a place of being fountains upon themselves, setting up businesses or practices or ways of creating in which they feel enriched by the process, but it's also enriching others. And so in this way, I'm living out a fraction of the philosophy that I'm excited to see in the world, where if we are all genuinely giving ourselves permission to live as our true selves and apply that to whatever delightful, practical expression we feel called to in the moment, that we not only individually elevate our lives, but we start finding the ways we naturally interconnect. Like us here, right? As a result of me making the channel, now we're having a conversation. And I know that this is a delightful experience for you guys. And those who are tuning in with us, hello, this is a delightful experience to listen and tune in. So we're all just having a really good time while we're also being in the vibe of who we truly are. And so, I mean, well done, everybody. Like, I know. All right. I'm wondering at this point, did that answer the question? Because I know you asked about trees, but if not,
it did, and it answered all kinds of questions. You know, for some reason, I had this kind of pernicious thought as you were talking about that, because a lot of it had to do with the importance of doing exactly what you want to do. Really, like up there in your hierarchy of importance was like something where I could be myself or something. I think that was up there. And I was thinking about how important that is to people with kids, you know, like wanting your kids to feel free to grow up to be as authentically expressive as they can be, you know, because the world when you're growing up can sometimes be anti that, you know, you're like, what happens along the way, you know, what kind of trauma happens along the way when you feel like you've got to get back to the point of authentic self-expression. You know, and so, yeah, I am pro that thing. I think it's a good example. I think it's a good example for people to see is people coming out and uniquely expressing themselves. I think that's a good thing. You know, thank God for the internet for that. Yeah. So many avenues to see that.
Where did it all begin? How did this journey start for you?
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you. So I actually had my channel up, I think it's for 7 years now. And about 7 or so years ago, I had been feeling inspired to talk about this kind of reality creation topic. I had gone through a pretty big, you know, inner journey, very challenging situation in my life, and then came to an understanding of what mattered to me and started to speak about it a little bit, both on like on podcasts. I had a podcast for a while, but I also did it on YouTube. And I put out a book, Eclipse of Consciousness, and then I also would speak and work with people privately. But what I found was at that juncture in my life, I was talking about reality creation, but a lot of people were wanting to talk theory with me. And I realized what I really wanted was embodiment of what I was talking about. So I actually, at that point, took an interesting turn. I went back to my roots of marketing and I started an agency I co-founded an agency with my co-business owner at the time. And so we did a creative agency for about 5 or 6 years, during which time I applied this process that I talked about through different phases of the agency. So I was, well, I am too, a business strategist and consultant. And so I worked one-on-one with a lot of people, with a lot of different businesses. And the interesting thing was, most of the time, we weren't really tackling business challenges. We were talking about the personal patterns or blocks that were maybe showing up again or again and pausing the business. And so a lot of times what happened is over the 6 years or so, I had a very direct practice with people who were very empowered, very insightful, had a lot of resource, but then would come to these certain junctures. And that's when I started to notice the correlation of patterns within self. So when people didn't address those things, even when they went to create a multi-million-dollar business, the pattern would just show up again and then pause you there. So it was just like, am I resolving the patterns at a personal level, or am I resolving the patterns at scale? Like, either way, you're kind of meeting the same challenge, which is why I share with people, the external things you do aren't the things that are fixing the problem. They're just the game that you're playing. And if there's any solutions that you want, you're always going to find them right here, right now, and within. You don't have to do a million things to figure that out. You can, but instead of necessarily going through a lot of energy to figure that out, I started to apply then in my own life. So through this experience, right, I went to the YouTube channel, then I did this agency and this, and then I started to understand what really mattered to me. And at that juncture, near the end of the run of my agency, I realized that I was amplifying businesses with my focus and attention and, my guidance and energy. So I started going, well, what do I want to amplify in the world with my focus and energy and intention? And, not that there was anything particularly wrong with the businesses, but was it my highest joy to focus and amplify that specifically? And so I did some really intense conversations with myself, because now we're talking about my livelihood, the lifestyle, and the momentum I had built. And I brought myself to a reckoning. Well, gee, if I bring this all to a screeching halt, then now what? And if I'm actually going to walk my talk, then now what? And it was a pretty powerful reckoning moment for me, because I realized how scared I was at that juncture to actually put the reality creation things that I had been focusing on to the test by taking the leap in my own life. It was daunting. But I did. I wrote down on paper. What I did was I wrote down on paper, when I was tuned into the life that was truly authentic to me, what would that look like? What would that feel like? What genuinely mattered? And then I pared that down even further. Like, I got to the point where I got to my truly non-negotiables, like the things that I'm like, if I'm saying I'm living a thriving life, this is essential. But it even got me clear, because, sometimes we're like, oh, to live a thriving life, I need this much money or that much. And I'm like, if there was an automatic robot that beamed everything down to me, do I care? Well, not really. So then I got to the part where I actually cared. What was the money providing me? Or was it the freedom of choice? Or was it sovereignty over my space and ability? And so I got clear. And by getting clear, it allowed me to be more precise with what I was focusing on and living in my reality. Because then I didn't need to tell myself what I did or didn't need to do anymore to live what I wanted. I had a pretty clear map. And so from there, I began to play in reality with all the configurations I had. And for about a year or so, I just focused on, doing some consulting while I played around with, well, what do I like this? What do I like that? And then I started to talk to the forest. And this is, I will be very clear. I speak with the forest. I speak with my heart. And so what I do, and you can do this, you do this with your animals. Your animals understand language and heart. You can talk to the dogs and they get it. They understand, most of the time. It depends on their personality if they'll listen or not. But the same thing with trees or anything else, the same thing with children. I find that nature just speaks differently than we do. But the scientists have actually been able to record that trees can sense things, trees can pull away or send out pheromones if something happens to them they don't like. Like, they're very responsive.
Yeah, I've heard about this. There's some people out there that there's a guy, I think, who has an entire YouTube channel, and all he does on his YouTube channel is hug trees. Literally, it's like his whole channel's about hugging trees.
Yes.
And he talks about like the energy and everything that it gives him, and
it's funny because, I say to people, you can actually collaborate with the land, because what happened was I went out to the land and I was saying to him, like, listen, I'm testing all these things out, because I caretake for a lot of different lands. So I'm like, I'm testing all these things out, and I'm like, I don't know what you're thinking or what you have to contribute. I joked with it. You want me to start, selling sticks or something? Like, what do I do here? And then I had this idea to film in the forest, and I was like, oh, like, and what's funny is, if you notice the videos, the things, like you said, happen in the forest. I mean, sometimes it's planes or something, but then sometimes animals come by, or sometimes things will make noise. And it's almost like the forest is a co-host on the channel.
Your audio is impeccable, by the way. I don't know how you do that, because I've seen other people do the same thing. You got the best forest audio I've ever heard. It's like incredible.
a lot of experimentation, but I appreciate it. I'll let the forest know too.
Yeah, it's quiet for you right at the perfect time.
I feel like it sort of touches back on the, like, needing the person to be receptive to where you're at, though. Like, there's some people I know that are in pretty severe distress, that if I was like, look, have you tried hugging a tree? They might like claw at me. You know what I mean? I don't know what they would do.
Well, it's true though. Like, it's funny. And the thing is, this is why sometimes it really, you can see the threads as they come together in hindsight. But thinking about it, I naturally feel inspired to be in the forest, but I also naturally feel inspired to, like, wear my outfits or be silly about it. And what I find reflected to me in some of the community comments and engagements is some people share that sometimes that silliness or the way that I share actually helps them not feel so alone. So even if sometimes I seem to present out their ideas, I don't actually have a primer on what anyone else should or should not do. You might notice that in my videos. I'm not telling anyone what they should or should not do. That's none of my business. What I do share with people is I share what has been resonant for me. I share my observations. I share perspectives. I'm kind of like, you ever tried this out? Does that suck? You want to try this flavor? Like, like how.
Do you ever want to tell people? Do you ever feel like being like, you should do this? Like sometimes I like to take on the role of raw nerve, the id or something. Like, I'm just gonna screw it. Everybody should do this. And you're very measured, and the way you speak is only helpful and smart. But like, everything's measured, and you can get that expression coming through. I'd be unhinged if I didn't have any inhibitions. I would look like David Bowie or something. I'd look like
you
the
say
Riddler.
It's like a bad thing. David Bowie. Okay.
I think it could happen one day. I'll descend from the ceiling every episode.
Can I be on that episode where you did come out of David Bowie?
And you're fostering that belief in myself. So if it happens, you'd be a linchpin.
Well, a big part of your story that stuck out to me, it was like the crossroad of coming face to face with your fear. And I think for a lot of people, when it comes to the creative path or any, like, trying to create a life for themselves, I feel like people are met with like, well, if I make this choice, it's never going to be the same again. Or there's no going back if I go all the way here. And I'm curious about what you did to combat the doubts and the fears what you did to help yourself get past all that.
I came to a juncture where I realized anything else I was doing was just delaying that step. So, in other words, for a long time, I had told myself, oh, okay, let me, do this part of marketing or that part, because then I'll have a lot of money and resource. If I have a lot of money and resource, then I can have time to do this or that or that. And this is how the mind often creates, right? It has an idea of how things can be, and then it enacts its brilliant plan through giving you all kinds of tasks to do. And some of them you're like, that sounds fine. And other ones you're like, ugh, really? And this is often how the mind creates. The heart creates in the most direct path possible for you from here, even if that direct path is like, dig a hole under the ground. What? You heard me. What? Get the shovel. What? Shouldn't I go dig a hole? And so, but you're like, well, what happens next? That's not what we're worrying about. We're worrying about what happens right now. See, the heart deals in right now. And what's happening is it's connecting you with the most resonant pathway to get everything you want, considering both your quirks, your challenges, your momentum, your not momentum. It's kind of factoring in everything, including what you genuinely want, which is why sometimes people get really tousled up about what they think they should be doing, because there's a master plan, don't you know? And so when that seeming master plan gets flipped on its lid and things aren't working out, people go like, ugh. So when you're asking me the question, what sent me the tipping point? I had this realization that the reasons I was giving myself not to step forward all ultimately could be boiled down to fear. Oh, I need more time. Oh, I'm not ready yet. I don't know if this is going to work out just right. This. And I'm like, well, what better thing to do? This is what I finally came to, guys. One of the big conundrums was, what if I go out and I teach this and it doesn't work, and I'm offering it to other people and they're, it's not working for them and it's no good for anyone, right? Because I wasn't interested in doing that, not for myself and not for anyone else. And what I came to was, I was like, yeah, but first off, if you go ahead and do this, if you genuinely do this, you go all in, not like half, oh, let's see what happens. You're like, well, nope, I'm all in. Let's go do this. One of two things is going to happen. One, it's either going to work out spectacularly or it's going to fail spectacularly. Either way, from that point, you are either going to have a trajectory where you're amplifying this, or your energy is going to be free to do whatever you need to do next. And it's not going to be kept in a loop, wondering when you're supposed to start or when that next piece of information comes. And I realized in doing that, I was going to tremendously free myself. And I would rather do that, have the potential of looking like a great big fool, not following through with that. But then suddenly, now that that's all done with, now I can live my amazing life, being like a potato sculpture carver. Maybe that was my path, but yeah, right? It's like, okay, thank goodness you got that out of the way. Now you're living your dream. So that was what got me over the edge.
There's an old saying. Well, I don't know how old it is. I first think I heard it quoted by Andrew Tate, and it was something like, on the chessboard, the queen can go wherever the hell she wants, but the king's got to move one piece at a time. And I'm imagining somebody that would I love what you're saying, but I'm kind of like a weirdo that takes crazy risks. I was a firefighter for a time. I run into danger, but I'm imagining somebody that is like, that ain't how it works. I gotta be measured, and there's a lot of people depending on me, and I don't have the freedom to be that way. Do you encounter these people when you're teaching, when you're, executing your method? And if you did, what would you say to them?
Well, sometimes they come across the page or things like that, and sometimes they share with me the stories of what's important in their life and what they can do and can't do. And I have a lot of empathy and understanding, right? We all have something, we all have importance in our life. So what you just described is something we can define as importance, right? We all have importance in our life. And what our importance is is going to vary wildly depending on who you're talking to, right? What's important to me? Oh, my kids, my job, my religion. What's important to me? My husband, my rabbit, my whatever, right? My philosophy, my this. So everyone has something they think is important. And whether they consciously believe it or not, it's usually what they pour their energy into. And it's either what they pour their energy into doing or what they pour their energy into avoiding. A lot of times the things people say are important to them are just part of it. Like what may be more important to them is that they're not seen as a failure, or that they are always surrounded and never alone. So sometimes people say, oh, the most important thing to me is this, but they're really, the thing that's actually running the show is a deep, 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 deep fear they have of not being seen as worthy, or not being seen as capable or competent, or that they will be alone and rejected. And then they've layered on top of that a story of, if I am a family person, or if I'm a good father, a good mother, or if I'm a good spouse, this will ensure I am always loved, and it will prove that I am worthy. So now this has become important to them because it has taken on a veneer. And what happens though is oftentimes they will fight it tooth and nail. So even if that marriage is no longer viable for them, let's just say they're having trouble and it's not even healthy for them anymore, they might grasp onto it, because to lose that means suddenly they have to revisit the part of themselves that goes, see, were you even lovable at all? Were you? And it comes to contending those deeper parts.
This comes up so often. Sorry if you don't mind me interjecting, but this is with people that work in this field. This relationships are obviously a big thing, because this has come up before. And I've never said this before, but I always just get concerned for, fine, if somebody out there, whoever has to face this thing, like relationships are a big deal, I just don't want anyone left behind. I just don't want anyone abandoned. You know what I mean? I hate the idea of anybody going like, well, I guess we have to be enemies now if we're going to separate. You know, that's the default so many people have. You know, how do we make it so that things can flourish and we can be a complex culture where people are mature enough to like be given and taken in relationship, and it not be a nightmare that traumatizes the children? You know, I just wanted to pause because this has come up before, you know, and just get your take on that.
Be the person who doesn't self-abandon, and therefore you are the person who never abandons. Abandonment always begins with self-abandonment. And that's when we abandon our own values, our own whatever, to either give to another or give outside of our capabilities. When we're parents, caretakers, mentors, whatever, we demonstrate strength. We become a support mountain within our field by first being able to be in integrity within ourselves, which includes self-trust, not abandoning the self, and having a healthy set of inner boundaries that we can then act outwardly. And what's funny about that is, as a result, you might complete a relationship with someone where you no longer speak with them because maybe there's an intensity there, but you can still have compassion or love in your heart for that person, as you simultaneously say, all right, and now we're complete and we need space. You are not abandoning them at a heart level. If anything, you are doing the most loving thing for both yourself and the other person. And what happens is, because some people think, no, staying there is what they need, but that's what we sometimes call enmeshment or enablement or things like this. And what happens is, whenever we make the authentic choice, whether it's to stay, whether it's to leave, whether it's to whatever, when we make the authentic choice from both a deep sense of self-love, we teach our children to make choices of self-love no matter their circumstances as well, so they can embody that. They see, parents are doing that. But two, we can continue to demonstrate by not bad mouthing or by not doing anything to the other person, whether or not the other person's willing to comply. You can still be the person that shows up and says, hey, listen, the other person, man, they're hurting right now. And when people are hurting, we don't need to let them hurt us. We can create space, but we can just remember that they're hurting. So, hey, maybe we can just say a little prayer for them each day, or maybe we can draw a little picture buried in the ground and imagine like their heart is just a little seed and just needs a little water before it flowers
just
again.
Demonstrate some kind of like,
compassion,
unconditional love. You say self-love, but one thing that I just kind of thought of was like how hard we are on ourselves. We judge ourselves, and we have this internal battle that we go through, and I was maybe wondering like how should someone approach that? How getting past like forgiving oneself and getting past the shames and the guilts and all the things that go on through the individual process there, because I think that's what leads to the disruptor in loving oneself.
Yeah. We're stuck at this one step. That was like, this is all a side avenue on the I don't know. Well, hey, we just go with the flow.
We're taking the guided tour down to this step. I love it. It's a powerful step though, guys. And I love that we're here. So when you're asking the question of self-love, and this is the thing, every relationship we have starts with the self. So we can only love others to the capacity on some level that we can allow ourselves to love and be loved. Okay. And some people argue with me on that. They're like, well, I'm really mad at myself, but I really love this. But I'm like, that's still because there's an aspect of yourself you love enough that way. And you're seeing it in this other person. This other person is allowing that part of yourself to come out. It still exists within you. Okay. It just may be in a lot of tangles. And so one reason I do talk about self-alchemy, even though we talk about anything from relationships to business to how to, create in reality, is that the fulcrum of your experience, or the center point, I like to use the word fulcrum for reasons. So the fulcrum of your experience is always going to begin with the emanation of what you not only believe or perceive is possible, but as you said, how you treat yourself. The first step I usually lead people in with, it's a bit of a sense of humor, is starting from a place of pretending you had like a sibling or something that maybe you were a complete jerk to for like years and years, or you kind of were there, you just assumed they would do what you wanted them to do, but every now and then you'd send them passive aggressive notes when they didn't do things you wanted to do and whatnot. Well, that's sort of the relationship some people have with themselves at that moment. Like you sort of assume your relationship with self, but if you have like unconscious programs, those can run as being hard on yourself or beating yourself up, especially if in childhood you had a lot of that, or reflected to you, not even necessarily from your family. It could have been from school or anything, right? If you had like a lot of intense experience.
That's like the default character most people have. That like fits nicely into a capitalistic culture that's like, hey, we'll sell you a bunch of stuff to cover up your trauma with. That's like the default character.
Yes, pretty much. And so what happens though is a lot of people assume relationship with the self without actually taking a moment to realize that we actually have a relationship with yourself. Like you can actually take yourself on dates. You can spend time building trust or ruining trust with yourself.
Imagine that. That is unbelievable. Imagine having the self-love to be like, I'm taking myself to dinner or I'm taking myself to the movies. People be like, you need to go to the doctor. Like, how dare you enjoy your own company that much, you freaking weirdo. And then, so now you got to surround yourself with some other traumatized person that's like just going to get together and, subtly, passive aggressively, spread their trauma onto you, so that at least you're not by yourself enjoying yourself. Sorry. Now we can get back on track. I can't believe that it's so simple. Why would it be wrong to enjoy yourself by yourself? It's crazy.
It's an interesting one because I don't view it, personally, I don't view it as wrong to do that. But of course, I'm a lady who puts on antlers and talks to thousands of people. So, I mean, my scale of what's normal or not normal, maybe, your results may vary, but that's the thing, I don't necessarily subscribe to the view of what's normal or not. what I do is I generally find that we can have cognizance, we can be aware of what, let's just say, the average climate of where we are might consider norm. You know, you're traveling in Europe, or you're traveling in Italy, what might be norm? Oh, you're traveling in the in California, what might be norm? And you can be aware, of your surroundings. You can be aware, but it doesn't have to psychologically touch your heart, so to speak, about what anyone else thinks or perceives about you. In this way, I find that I can move effectively in the world without feeling like I need to diminish myself. I also don't need to go everywhere and tell everyone, I'm the alchemist. Look at me.
Something's gone wrong.
It's not, I mean, maybe I'll do that one day. I'll be like, as foretold on the show. But, I don't find the need to do it. And so what happens is, as a result, I'm able to effectively move in the world, and I'm effectively able to be seen where I'd like to be seen and not be seen where it's unimportant for me to be seen. Yeah. Which is helpful.
Okay.
So,
do we need to get to another step? I don't know. Like we were talking about steps there. I don't know. Is there another? Where are we going?
Let's put the cap. Let's put the cap on the self-love part, because I think this is the part that we're circling around. When a person has challenges with self-love, begin with curiosity, and begin by simply having a conversation with yourself the same way you talk to another person. When they have like the what is it, that the 12-step program has this whole reparations thing, right? The people that you've really upset over, that you come back and you make, well, I say to people, maybe do that with yourself. Like, what are things that you have said and done over the years, and kind of come back to that. And, hey, so I know I was kind of just beating up on you for the last few years, and I'm sorry. It's what I did because I thought that's what I needed to do to take care of us. I thought that's what I needed to do for us to survive. I can see how that sucked, but it's also not about beating yourself up for doing it. You take responsibility, but while saying like, I could see how I thought this would be good for us, but check it out. I'm ready for doing this in a new way, and I want you with me. I want you with me all the way. It's you and me together, me and me and me. We're in this together.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Yeah. I feel like something that might happen is you'd be like, you know what, self, this has been a long time coming, but I just wanted to say I understand where you were at when you did that. And it'll be like, really? You're willing to forgive that? Now look at this stuff that I've made you forget you even did. You'd be like, damn. All right. I guess I can see past that too. That's hard. Good, because we got a whole warehouse of buried memories for you to go through.
Well, that is kind of how it is. Because in the beginning, this, they're like, oh, that feels great. Good. Ready for the next, what? You're like a truck, beep, beep, beep. Hold on. Yeah. And that's what happens though in the beginning. If we have a backlog, if we haven't been looking at it, but the payoff is that pretty soon you have a pretty copacetic relationship with yourself. And because you're not taking garbage from yourself, you start finding that you don't take it from anyone else, because you're like, well, I wouldn't let myself talk to myself this way. Why would I let you?
That's an interesting stage to be in, because all this stuff happens in stages, I'm sure you know. And then there's like this stage of like extreme confidence where you're like, I know everything because I'm honest with myself. So I can my bullshit detector's off the charts. People are like, what the hell, man? Like, you don't give even it's a stage, I think, that can happen. Well, I'm going to shift gears dramatically and just go quantum leap into the next thing, because one thing I always like to ask our guests, and maybe I'll ask it in a way that you can kind of like pick what you want to grab here, but I'm always fascinated with structures of reality, God, supernatural, divinity, and personal experience. Whatever you can gather from that, whatever you take from that and you feel comfortable jumping on, I'll let you have it.
All right. So like I mentioned earlier, I experienced this reality as one where we are essentially all one. And, you may have had people talk about this before. For those who are tuning in, it's probably similar to what you've heard about the law of one, things like that, that we're all essentially oneness in these perceived individuated experiences, but not just as our human bodies. You could actually kind of scale up and be like, oh, well, here's the higher self of that human body. Up, here's the soul of that. Up, here's the oversoul of that. Up. And we may have certain layers of self. And I sometimes compare this to a tree, kind of like, oh, I'm the leaf on the tree, and oh, I'm the leaf on the tree connected to this particular twig. And look, here's all these other leaves. Oh, it's my soul family. Oh, and that twig is connected to this part of the branch. And oh, look, we're all kind of having a similar experience here. And oh, now that branch is connected to this node of the tree. Oh, and oh, wow, okay, I'm the whole tree, right? So it's the tree focusing all of its energy into being the leaf, right? It's like if we were able to focus all of our attention energy into being just the tip of the fingernail. But see, I'm also, when I bring my consciousness back, I'm also all of this as well. So from that perspective, us all having this individuated experience, it seems to me like it's been and I like what you said in the beginning, it's like an experience for the sake of experience is how I ultimately see life. I understand the feelings of pain and distress that some people can have when that comes forward. Like, I wouldn't sign up for this experience. And the funny thing is I simply just invite people to consider the layer of game you are playing at and the layer of consciousness that you had when it decided to have experiences that included suffering, because at the time there was an aspect of you that believed or perceived it would be an interesting experience to have. It would be different. It would have context. It would be something that added to the expansion of who you are. Because I also perceive each of us in the present moment is living at what is represented for us as the leading edge of consciousness for ourselves in any given moment. Since everything is happening simultaneously, so in the present moment right now, any potential parallel future or past lives are also happening simultaneously, presently, right now. So kind of like to use the analogy of a tree, it could be like seeing like time as a map if it was just unraveled. It was just all existing at the moment. And if you zoomed out far enough, it's like seeing everything happen at once, but you zoom in enough and now you're in this localized reality, which is fun. Very interesting. Makes for fun times here on planet Earth. So where do I bring all that home here? So part of the fun of this particular experience, if you want to call it that, is that when we remember the bigger scope of it, and then we come back to our human experience in our day-to-day and all the stuff that we get to do or we choose to do, we start to realize that life is about as important as we make it in any given moment. And interestingly enough, when we lightly hold both the concept of life and the concept of death simultaneously, very lightly in our lives, we stop living to avoid dying and we start living for the joy of living. And the fun of this is that instead of mistaking ourselves for creatures that are broken that must learn, we recognize ourselves as unique expressions of life force in an endless dance of existence, having a lot of fun, being on a podcast.
Right. Yeah. Hear ye, I guess. I don't know what to say. Another question I wanted to pose for you is we had talked a little bit earlier about momentum. And I'm just curious, do you have any, I don't know if you care about this stuff at all, but do you have any takes on the circumstances of the world and where we're at right now? Any ideas on where we're headed? What do you see kind of going on? Maybe from kind of like a meta perspective, like
Sure.
What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to offer that. So the first thing I'll make sure that I communicate to everyone tuning in is I'm just tuning into the probabilities based on momentum. I love that you use that word because any of us who's tuning on what's not happening in the now, we're just taking a look at the probabilities or what may be likely to happen based on like we said, oh, okay, that ball's rolling down the hill and it's gaining this much speed, and boy, it sure looks like it's going to land right there, based on how it's been connecting and collecting. So anything is still theoretically possible to shift, but I'll just share what I see, and I've been looking at it and tracking it for a little while now. And what I found is in the recent years, the trajectory I can sense into has shortened. What I mean by that is there was a period of time, like let's say back in 2010, when I could feel the trajectory a lot further down the line. And as events have been happening in the world, we're entering a phase where you could say, let's just say that with chaos, with perceived chaos, comes potential mutations. With potential mutations comes completely new possibilities and probabilities. And what is expected is no longer expected. So suddenly you have a vortex of possibilities where the most interesting and powerful thing starts becoming what's happening in the now moment. Because where we're individually and collectively focused is what comes out in the next step. So it's like, okay, all this momentum's been going into this, and now we're in the portal. It's like, what? Okay, so what gets to happen next? What? Yeah, focus. And that's kind of almost where a lot of us are. From a psyche perspective, we're still witnessing, the passage of time and everything. But this is one reason why I share with people, you don't need to get too wrapped up in that, in what has been before, because if you want to describe it this way, you could see certain events as accelerating right now, and you can see certain events as more probable. So,
isn't there potential in there for like crazy beauty though? It sounds like it's reminiscent a little bit of some of the stuff Terrence McKenna talked about, a novelty becoming like, the distance between wanting something and getting it gets shorter and shorter, and novelty is just going to go crazy, and then it's going to become like unbearably novel, like the craziest stuff you can imagine. But I have this feeling, or this, I don't know, I'm just considering that maybe it could be unbelievably beautiful if you have the capacity to put your hands up sort of like on a roller coaster and go with the flow with it. You know what I mean? That it could be crazy fun,
Word. That's my experience. I'm right here. I'm right here with you. The trajectory that I see. I'll answer your question really specifically. We're in consciousness. I'm going to use these words, take them lightly to anyone's listening. We're at a brink of consciousness evolution. We're like in it right now. And a lot of us are already aware of that, who have been having these conversations. It's not like a huge kept secret. And there's both, cosmic phenomenon that points to it, prophetic ones, but we can also just kind of like, feel it in the air right now. It is how things are being. What I personally sense is this is an opportunity where there's many different, let's just say it's almost like being at an airport, right? And there's many different planes that can take off from here. And it really just kind of depends on what kind of reality people want to experience, like the beautiful reality you're talking about that does exist. Or does someone want to like go through a real intense experience? There's that plane over there. Oh, does someone want to have a pretty chill ride? There's that plane over there. And so when I say you can really tune in to the reality that delights you, that's not just hyperbole. I am describing a phenomenon of existence in which we are able to attune consciously, individually, but also collectively to the reality we want without assuming it's going to be hard or take time or energy. And so the probabilities that I can feel, there's some mass probabilities of there's a lot of system, like there's a lot of system shifting that's happening right now. And I just mean that, like, economic level, but governance level, but it even's happening at an individual level because people are asking, well, what kind of work do I want to do? People are waking up to how they want to live reality, whether they're agreeing with our way of describing it or not. Like, this is just what is happening at a global scale. The experience of having a global pandemic and making and having a lot of people suddenly pause their lives has been one of the cascades for this. But I wouldn't even say it's like a chicken or egg thing. It's like, it in a way it was happening because the collective was like, oh god, hold on everyone, where are we careening towards? And like, we create the pause.
Yeah. I was like, I coasted into the pandemic asleep and then woke up somewhere along the way. I was like, wait a sec, what's happening? But before we had this interview, I guess in the last email that we talked about, you asked us what our favorite animal was or whatever, and I was just curious what that was about or what.
How dare you?
I wanted to know. Secret dialogue. I wanted to know.
Well, let's bring it forward. Are we allowed to talk about your favorite animals? Right? I guess you brought it up.
So. Favorite animals? I don't know if this is my favorite animal. At the time, I don't know. I was just going at the time. It's what came.
Let's bring it up. And yes, one of the reasons I like to ask about people's favorite animals or things like this, it doesn't always have to be favorite animals. One of the reasons that I enjoy these kinds of inquiries is they provide for me a lot of rich context about where a person is focusing or not. And we have different languages. They include numbers, they include symbology. And in this case, animals could be seen as archetypal symbology. So when a person answers that question, they're often at least providing for me in my own vernacular, my own wild animal card vernacular, they're providing for me a window into where they are focused at the present moment. And it really, some people go, well, what if I picked a different animal? I'm like, well, then you would have picked a different animal. You didn't. You picked that one. That's what you did. So it was. Can I mention what each of your animals were?
Sure, yeah. Go for it. Let's hear it. Let's do it. Let's be brave.
So Justin went with an owl. Okay. And I think that's delightful. I think that I'll show you. Hold on. I'm going to turn off my camera for one moment here. Okay. Actually, I'll just show you this. Look at this. On the back of my phone, we got an owl. Yeah. All right. And James had a jellyfish. Okay, now for this one, I'll turn off the camera. One moment. So here, we're actually going to do this. So also, Justin's with an owl. So this is...
Bam!
This is Bernard the owl.
This is all destiny.
I know. Bernard the business owl. And this one right here, one of my first cosmic jellyfish.
Very nice. That is... I like it. Jigs up reality. Jigs up reality. This is... I kind of wish I picked a horse.
The secret is to fill your house with the painting of every animal there.
I have a tattoo of an owl here and a tattoo of a jellyfish here.
Well, the fun of it is also a play with synchronicity. So I laughed a bit because the thing is, I actually do. Owl is one of my favorite animals, which is why I even had it on the back of my phone. But jellyfish is an interesting one as well, that I've contemplated a lot. And so I felt inspired to ask you guys, because I was just genuinely curious where you may or may not be focused in the present moment. And so I can offer a perspective for each animal. Want to hear it?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. Buckle up. So with the owl, the owl is a ancient one.
Hot in here. So hot in here.
I have the heater going, so I don't know if that's adding.
Sorry, don't let me know. Our studio for some reason is set to cooker, so on my screen I'm as red as the devil right now.
Got it. Perfect. Good timing. So all right. So for the animals, the owl, so it represents oftentimes things like, wisdom, being able to see in the darkness, being able to move silently, because owls can fly without being heard. They're one of the most silent predators, actually, flying through the night. But interestingly enough, they can also just represent being able to see others' intentions, being able to see your own intentions.
He's always accusing me of that.
That's pretty funny.
I'm also always accusing myself of that.
Got it. So everyone's pointing that way. I see. And James with the jellyfish. Interestingly enough, jellyfish are unusual creatures because they don't really have a structure, so to speak, similar to most of the creatures that we know of, right? They kind of seem to float in the water. But when I was studying or considering jellyfish,
they're spineless,
something about
it. I'm just kidding.
Well, they're the ability to actually be so flow-based and natural. They're almost one with nature because they float and they bob in the ocean, and without needing to necessarily put a lot of energy or effort in, fish come to them, get tangled in the in the tendrils. They come in and such. And so jellyfish actually live this very, again, in the flow kind of life. They also live collectively oftentimes. They'll often travel like in great clouds of jellyfish. So it's about just being able to naturally be who you are in the environment you're in, whether by yourself or with a group, without having to expend more energy than required. It's very efficient. So interestingly enough, that's what I take from jellyfishes.
Cool. All right. That's cool. Wow, I thought it was cool. Thanks so much for
We made it.
I'm glad you asked. I did before this show started. I was like, we're going to talk about the animals, and it's going to be like you're a predator or something like that. It was like you're the silent prey. That's so funny.
Well, the other thing I'll lay on you, at least with it before you go, is they're also, just so you know, they're seen as symbols of transformation and regeneration and adaptability, because they can get their tentacles ripped off and they grow them right back, and you chomp them out and they'll grow right back. So
the jellyfish are.
Yes. Oh yeah, don't take a bite out of an owl. They won't grow that back.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, why don't, to close things out, you let our audience know where they can find you, what you got going on, and all that good stuff.
No, I would love that. Well, you can find me for one on YouTube, True Self Alchemy with Danielle Lynn. But you can also check my website, daniellelynn.com. So at the moment, I also host the Self Alchemy Lab. This is a membership group where I basically facilitate conversations. We have regular calls, workshops, but I also put up trainings on things such as how to develop relationship within yourself, how to go from being, let's say, not in self-love to being self-unified. And I also share things like meditations and attunements for reprogramming your subconscious, your belief systems and such, towards a place where you're connecting with who you truly are. So daniellelynn.com or True Self Alchemy, you'll find a lot of my links on either one of those pages. And if you're looking to connect with me, one of those sources through there would be amazing.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Thank you so
This
much.
was so fun.
This was a blast.
This was so fun.
I had a great time too, guys. It was very, very fun. Thank you for having me on.